The Sirens in Tel Aviv. The sirens in Tel Aviv began their haunting wail just after 2:47 a.m. Residents had barely registered the alarm before the night erupted into a monstrous orange blaze. What followed wasn't the familiar whine of intercepted rockets. It was a deafening thunderclap that seemed to shake the very bones of the earth. This was no false alarm. Something had pierced through the city's defenses. Something catastrophic. Iran's long-awaited retaliation had arrived. In the heart of Rothschild Boulevard, a peaceful, tree-lined neighborhood, a missile struck with chilling accuracy. It didn't hit just any house. It tore into the home of Yob Anami, a prominent Israeli tech engineer, his wife Sarah, and their 6-month-old son, Noam. The blast shattered windows across 3 city blocks. Dust, debris, and flames surged outward in a violent wave, suffocating the air with heat and smoke. Their house, once a lovingly restored century-old stone townhouse, was reduced to rubble. Flames clawed through its crumbling ceilings. The air was thick with the smell of burning fuel, scorched metal, and something far more heartbreaking. The scent of memories turned to ash. Emergency crews arrived within minutes. The screams of neighbors pierced the night air. Whole families stumbled barefoot into the streets. Homes reduced to ruin, cracked wide open like shattered eggshells. Firefighters battled the growing inferno with frantic urgency. But deep in the wreckage of the Banami home, something would stop them cold. It was firefighter Elliot who heard it first. Crawling through the collapsed archway of what remained of a nursery, its roof torn open, the walls glowing with live embers, he paused. A sound. A cry. A baby's cry. He froze. Among the charred beams and broken toys, the cry came again. Faint, but unmistakably real. "Here! I hear something!" Elliot yelled, his voice nearly drowned in the chaos. 2 others joined him, tearing apart the smoldering debris. And then, beneath a cracked support beam and a scorched wooden crib, they found him. Noam. His tiny body dust-covered, his cheeks flushed from the heat, but alive. Alive. Clutched tightly in his little arms was a small green book. Its edges were scorched, yet somehow it had survived almost entirely intact. It was a Qur'an. The firefighters stared, stunned into silence. Amir, one of them, reached forward and gently lifted the baby. The moment his fingers touched the child, the crying stopped. Noam blinked. His hands gripped the book even tighter. How is this possible?" Elliot whispered. The flames had clearly consumed everything. Photos, furniture, even the metal frame of the crib had twisted in the heat. But the child, and the Qur'an, were untouched. Not a single burn. They rushed Noam outside. Sarah and Yo were nowhere to be found. Paramedics took over, quickly examining the baby. No burns, no fractures, no trauma. "His vitals are perfect," the lead medic said in disbelief. This doesn't make sense." As the sun rose, media vans began arriving. News anchors broadcast live from the ruins, speculation swirling in every direction. Was it a miracle? A freak accident of physics? A protective force? One camera zoomed in on the Qur'an in the baby's arms, its golden Arabic script still shining faintly beneath the soot. By mid-morning, the video of the baby who survived an Iranian missile strike had already gone viral, but behind the scenes, confusion deepened. Where were Noam's parents? At Tel Aviv General Hospital, Noam was placed in a secure neonatal recovery unit. Doctors conducted more tests. No signs of injury, no explanation. He seemed peaceful, radiant even. A social worker was called. So was Shin Bet. The biggest question on everyone's lips. How did a Jewish baby end up holding a Qur'an? Had someone else been in the house? Later that day, the answer surfaced. A neighbor, trembling and exhausted, told a nurse they had a helper, a girl, Palestinian. Her name was Ruba. She was sweet, quiet, used to sit with the baby and read to him from that book. The nurse froze. A Qur'an. Later, Ruba was found, injured but alive. She'd been discovered unconscious in a nearby alley, a deep wound on her head. When she regained consciousness in the emergency ward, her first word was, "Noam, the baby. Did he survive?" The nurse gently told her, "He's safe." Tears filled Ruba's eyes. She clasped her hands and whispered, "Alhamdulillah." She was moved to the ICU under watch. Officials approached with caution. Some interrogated, others simply observed. But Ruba didn't resist. She spoke the truth. "I read him Qur'an every day," she said softly. His mother would laugh, say it was silly, but sometimes, she'd listen too. Back at the hospital, Sarah and Yo were officially declared missing. Their phones were dead, no trace, no signal, no bodies. Then something unusual happened. While adjusting Noam's blanket that evening, Nurse Dina felt something tucked in the folds. A note, scorched at the edges. She carefully unfolded it. "If anything happens to us, please don't let Noam grow up hating. Let him be raised around truth. Sarah." The nurse stared at the message. Hating. Truth. She passed it quietly to the authorities. The press never learned about the note, but in the soft-lit silence of the neonatal ward, something sacred lingered. Ruba, now healing, was allowed to visit Noam. As soon as she entered, the baby reached for her scarf. She smiled gently, pressing her forehead to his. She whispered softly into his ear. Surah al-Baqarah, verse 286, Allah does not burden a soul beyond what it can bear. That night, in a small hospital room, a Jewish nurse, a Palestinian girl, and an Israeli infant sat together. Outside, Tel Aviv still trembled from the blast. The headlines screamed of war and vengeance. The world speculated over who would strike next. But inside that quiet room, a miracle had already taken place, and it was only the beginning. It was Elliot who heard it first. He had crawled through the remnants of a collapsed archway into what appeared to have once been a nursery. Half the roof was gone, and the walls, now blackened with soot, pulsed with dying embers. Then came a sound, sharp, fragile, a cry, a baby's cry. Elliot froze in place. Amid the twisted beams and shattered remnants of childhood toys, the cry echoed again. Weak, but unmistakably alive. "Here, I hear something," he shouted, his voice nearly drowned out by the roaring chaos around him. 2 firefighters scrambled in response, clawing through the remnants of the ceiling. Together, they uncovered the source, beneath a cracked support beam and what remained of a scorched wooden crib. It was Noam. His tiny body was blanketed in ash and dust, his cheeks flushed from the heat. But he was alive. Miraculously, undeniably alive. And in his small arms, pressed tightly to his chest, was a green book. Its corners were singed, its cover partially blackened, but it had survived. It was a Qur'an. The 3 firefighters paused, stunned into silence. One of them, Amir, stepped forward. With careful hands he lifted the infant from the debris. As soon as his fingers touched the child, the crying stopped. Noam blinked. His hands tightened their grip around the sacred book. "How? How is this even possible?" Elliot whispered in disbelief. The fire had scorched everything around the crib. Walls, flooring, even the metal railings were warped and blackened. Family photos had been reduced to ashes. Furniture was unrecognizable, and yet, impossibly, the baby and the Qur'an had no trace of flame upon them. They rushed Noam outside. Sarah and Yo were nowhere in sight. Paramedics received the baby with urgent care, immediately checking for wounds. No burns, no broken bones. "His vitals are normal," the lead medic whispered, staring in disbelief. "This doesn't make any sense." Before the sun had fully risen, media vans arrived at the scene. News anchors spoke breathlessly from the rubble, broadcasting to a nation desperate for clarity. Speculation surged. Was it a miracle? A coincidence? An anomaly of physics? One camera zoomed in on the Qur'an nestled in the infant's arms. The golden Arabic calligraphy on the cover shimmered, defying the devastation. By mid-morning, the footage of the miracle baby who had survived Iran's missile strike had gone viral across the world. But behind the camera flashes and headlines, deeper questions loomed. Where were Noam's parents? At Tel Aviv General Hospital, Noam was placed in a secure neonatal recovery unit under constant observation. Doctors ran test after test. No injuries, no trauma. The child remained calm, almost glowing with a quiet peace. The hospital staff brought in a social worker. Authorities contacted Shin Bet, Israel's internal security service, to investigate what was quickly becoming an international mystery. How had a Jewish child been found cradling a Qur'an? Had someone else been in the home? Later that same day, a survivor, disheveled and still shaking, spoke quietly to a nurse. They had a helper, the neighbor said. A girl, Palestinian, I think. Her name was Ruba. Sweet girl. Quiet. She used to sit with the baby in the mornings and read to him from that book. The nurse froze. A Qur'an. Later that evening, Ruba was located. Injured, but alive. She had been found unconscious in an alley nearby, a deep gash bleeding along her scalp. When she finalized, Ruba, now stable, was allowed to visit. The moment she entered the room, Noam reached out and tugged at her scarf. She smiled gently, leaned in, and pressed her forehead to his. Then she whispered softly into his ear. Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 286. Allah does not burden a soul beyond what it can bear. That night, in a single hospital room, sat a Jewish nurse, a Palestinian girl, and an Israeli infant, together. Outside, Tel Aviv still reeled from the aftermath of the blast. Headlines screamed of escalation, vengeance, war. But inside that room, something far more powerful had already occurred. A miracle, and it was only the beginning. 3 days had passed since the missile struck. Though the smoke had cleared, the scars remained, etched into the city and in the hearts of those who had witnessed the unexplainable. The Banami home, or what remained of it, stood sealed behind caution tape and guarded checkpoints. Yet buried beneath the ash and silence, something still pulsed. Questions, unanswered, haunting, urgent. Where were Sarah and Yo? The child, miraculously unharmed, had become a national symbol. News anchors referred to him as the fireborn child. Gifts and prayers poured in from across Israel, but few knew the full story. Only a handful had seen the Qur'an. Only Ruba knew its origin. In a quiet hospital room, Ruba sat in a wheelchair, her head wrapped in fresh bandages, her face pale but composed. She had been told she could leave once her concussion healed, but she had no desire to go. Her gaze remained fixed on the hallway. "I need to see him again," she whispered to Nurse Dina. "Please." The nurse hesitated. "The authorities, they're watching. Even him." Ruba nodded. "Then let them watch. I held him since he was born. If his parents are gone, he still has me." Dina said nothing. But later that night, as the hospital quieted and the guards became distracted by a bomb threat downtown, she quietly wheeled Ruba into the nursery. There, under the soft warmth of overhead lights, Noam slept peacefully. Beside him, resting atop a pristine white cloth, was the Qur'an, untouched. The room felt otherworldly, still, sanctified, as if it had been spared from the outside world's noise and destruction. Ruba leaned forward, gently brushing her fingers across the baby's brow. "Noam," she whispered, her voice shaking, "you're not just alive. You were chosen." The following morning, a new chapter began. Investigators, led by IDF intelligence officers, combed through the remains of the Banami residence one final time. Amidst melted electronics and ash-covered picture frames, a startling discovery brought the team to a halt: a hidden basement. Previously overlooked, it had been concealed beneath fallen beams and rubble. Inside, under a collapsed shelf, they found 2 bodies, charred, hands clasped tightly together, faces turned toward one another. Dental records confirmed it. Sarah and Yo Banami, deceased. But the detail that silenced the investigators was this. Between their bodies, pressed close to their chests, was another Qur'an. This one too was mostly intact, slightly burned at one corner, and within it, one verse stood out, still legible. Say, "Nothing will happen to us except what Allah has decreed for us. He is our protector." Surah At-Tawbah 9:51. The discovery was never made public. The government feared panic, division. But for the men who found it, and for Elliot, the firefighter who had carried Noam from the flames, something had changed. A story had begun. A different kind of war was unfolding. One not of fire and missiles, but of faith, mercy, and meaning. At the hospital, something in the atmosphere had shifted. Nurse Dina walked into the break room and found 2 of her colleagues quietly reading from a Hebrew-translated Qur'an. One of them, eyes filled with questions, murmured, I need to understand. How was it untouched? Why this book? Why this child?" A hushed conversation passed between them, charged with emotion. Was it divine intervention? Just coincidence? Or something meant to awaken us? Meanwhile, Ruba sat across from a visitor, a young journalist named Lidl Abraham, assigned to cover the human angle of the missile strike. Raised in a secular household, Lidl had always approached religion with skepticism. Yet something about Noam's survival stirred a deep discomfort she couldn't name. "I don't get it," she said frankly. "You were reading the Qur'an, and then the baby survives? You think that's connected?" Ruba didn't flinch. "I don't think," she replied softly. "I believe." Lidl leaned back, arms crossed, brow furrowed. But his parents were Jewish. Why would a Muslim holy book protect a Jewish child? Ruba met her gaze with unwavering calm. Because God doesn't belong to anyone. He's not Israeli. He's not Palestinian. He's just God. That sentence followed Lidl home like a shadow. She couldn't stop thinking about the destroyed house, the untouched baby, and the 2 Qur'ans. One clutch. We didn't know what to believe until the fire. If we are gone, raise him to know kindness and truth. Maybe the words you spoke were right all along. S. Ruba held the letter to her lips as tears spilled down her cheeks. She recognized Sarah's handwriting. It was a message prepared in case they didn't survive. A message not only of trust in Ruba, but in the faith she carried. Closing her eyes, she looked upward and whispered, Ya Allah, let them be forgiven. At the edge of the hospital compound, a plainclothes man stood watching. Lieutenant Viram, from Internal Military Intelligence, had seen the footage, interviewed the firefighters, and reviewed both Qur'ans with thermal imaging. He'd spoken to language experts, scientists, engineers. Nothing explained how 2 highly flammable books had remained intact. Nothing explained how a baby wrapped in flame emerged without a scratch. But deep in Viram's heart, he, the son of a Holocaust survivor, something stirred. Not doubt, hope. He turned quietly and left the hospital. That evening, as dusk settled over Tel Aviv and the call to prayer drifted faintly from distant Jaffa, Noam stirred in his sleep. Ruba sat beside him once more, gently rocking his crib. I don't know what Allah has planned for you, she whispered, but I know He saved you, and maybe through you, others will be saved. Outside, the city buzzed with politics, grief, and post-war tension. But inside that room, a hush reigned. A fire had been lit, not one that destroyed, but one that awakened. As night deepened, city lights flickered against the Tel Aviv skyline. The smoke had cleared, but its memory lingered, in the buildings, in the people, and in their minds. The missile had fallen into the past. But the mystery it left behind had just begun to rise. At the center of it all was Noam, alive, unscathed, still unexplained, and resting beside him, a Qur'an. At Tel Aviv General Hospital, quiet conversations passed among the staff. Word had spread. Sarah and Yo hadn't just died in the basement. They had been found holding the very same book their son now kept beside him. Those rooted in science whispered about structural anomalies. Others spoke of physics and probability. But those with hearts wide open, they were beginning to believe in something more. Then came the second letter. Not from Sarah this time, but from Yo. It was discovered by an IDF recovery officer named David, who had been assigned to catalog remnants from the Benami home. Most of what he found was irreparably damaged: melted photo frames, scorched jewelry, a half-destroyed menorah. But inside a ceramic box, miraculously intact, was a small journal. Yo's handwriting filled its pages, dated just weeks before the missile struck. David brought it to the chief investigator, but before sealing it as evidence, he read the final page. She reads to him every day, that girl, not Hebrew, Arabic. She says it's the Qur'an. At first, I felt uneasy. It's not our way, I thought, but then I listened. Her voice, the rhythm, the peace that descends when she recites, it changes the room. Sarah doesn't say much, but I know she hears it too. I don't know if God is in that book, but there's power in those words. Maybe this child will understand better than I ever could. Maybe we were wrong to fear what we don't know. The journal was never leaked. Too dangerous, the officials said, but those who read it felt something ancient stirring in their bones. Meanwhile, Noam remained under care. Ruba visited daily. Doctors had stopped questioning her presence. They couldn't. Not after witnessing how the child instantly calmed whenever she entered. Not after the discovery of the second Qur'an, found nestled between Sarah and Yo's bodies, almost as if the fire had parted around it. Nurse Dina, once a skeptic of faith, now stood quietly during Ruba's readings. One day, she spoke softly. "Can you read that verse again? The one that says, 'God is closer than our veins'?" Ruba nodded gently and whispered, "We are closer to you than your jugular vein." Surah Qaf, verse 16. Dina nodded, her eyes glassy, her heart pounding. Then she turned and walked away, tears trailing down her cheeks. Inside the hospital, the story had caught fire, this time metaphorically. Media outlets debated fiercely. Was this a miracle or a myth? Right-wing pundits dismissed any divine implication. Some even accused Ruba of planting the Qur'an, demanding her deportation. But the truth had already rooted itself in the hearts of many. Online forums buzzed with questions. What does the Qur'an say about children? How did Noam survive? Can miracles have a scientific explanation? Did his parents convert? No one knew the full truth, but the silence left room for something powerful: imagination. In Jaffa, Imam Musa sat with a group of Muslim and Jewish youth in the courtyard of his mosque. In his lap was the second Qur'an, the one found between Sarah and Yo. A firefighter had given it to him in secret, saying only, "The article went viral within hours. Half the nation read it, a quarter criticized it, and a quiet but growing minority printed it out, folded it carefully, and tucked it inside books, wallets, and hearts." Meanwhile, Noam was thriving. Doctors were astonished by how quickly he developed. His body bore no scars, no signs of trauma. His brain scans were pristine. His vitals, steady, strong, vibrant. A child born of fire yet untouched by it. Touched instead by something unseen. Ruba often sang to him in Arabic, lullabies woven from verses of the Qur'an. Sometimes, as if recognizing the rhythm, Noam would giggle or coo on cue. One moonlit night, as she rocked him gently by the nursery window, she whispered, "You are not mine, you know." but I will love you like you are." She paused, her voice quiet and reverent. "And if Allah wills, one day you'll read this book for yourself." But not everyone was at peace. In the halls of government, tensions were rising. Some officials demanded a narrative correction. They wanted the miracle silenced, suppressed. Yet others, surprisingly, argued for honesty. One retired Army general said during a private meeting, "We've buried too many truths for too long. If these people died with that book between them, maybe they saw something we didn't. But decisions take time. And miracles. They don't wait." In a forgotten back office of the hospital, an elderly janitor discovered something else. Hidden behind a cabinet inside Sarah's locker was another note, folded, faded, trembling in handwriting. "To whoever finds this, if you ever wonder who we were two people who listened, not to politics, not to fear, but to the voice in the silence, to the recitation, and to the one who believed in it." Sarah Banami. That evening, Ruba stood alone in the hospital mosque, dimly lit and silent. She held the note close, tears sliding down her cheeks as she prayed, but not for herself, not even for Noam. She prayed for those who once feared her, for those who died believing in her truth and, perhaps, in his. 2 weeks had now passed since the missile fell, since a fire consumed a quiet neighborhood in Tel Aviv, since an infant was discovered in the ashes, untouched, holding a sacred book to his chest. Since his parents, Sarah and Yobanami, were found lifeless, a second Qur'an clutched between them. The headlines had faded. The sirens were silent. But something deeper still burned. A question, one no one could answer. What name would he carry? In the children's recovery ward, Noam lay under soft lights, his tiny fingers reaching constantly for the Qur'an beside him. He could not yet speak. But every time Ruba entered the room, his eyes found her, as if he already understood something the world could not. Now, fully recovered, Ruba had been asked to remain at the hospital, not as a maid, but as Noam's temporary guardian. Legal battles had begun. Distant relatives from Sarah's side had attempted to claim custody, but none of them had ever met the child, and when they visited, he cried. He never cried with Ruba. A court hearing was scheduled for the following week. The judge wanted answers. Who would raise this child? Who would shape his faith? Who would define his identity? But Noam's identity had already begun to form, not by law, not by debate, but by something divine. That afternoon, Ruba stood in the hospital garden with Imam Musa. It was the first time they'd spoken since the quiet, government-controlled funeral for Sarah and Yo. She showed him the handwritten letters from Sarah's locker. The Imam read each one slowly, then looked to the sky. "They didn't just witness truth," he said gently. "They embraced it, silently, but completely." Ruba nodded. "I felt it in her voice," she said, "in the way she lingered when I recited." She hesitated. "I don't want to dishonor them, but you believe Noam deserves to know," Imam Musa finished for her. She nodded again, brushing away a tear. "I want him to grow up knowing who his parents became in their final hours. I want him to carry their light." The Imam studied her face, then asked, "What name will you give him?" She looked down. In one hand she held Sarah's note, in the other a soft blanket embroidered with Hebrew letters. "Noam." She whispered, "Abdullah." That name spread like a gentle wind among those closest to the child. Nurse Dina cried quietly when she heard it. Elliot, the firefighter who had pulled him from the ruins, stood in the courtyard watching the sunrise in silence. Even Liedel, the journalist who had chronicled the miracle, found herself whispering the name aloud. Abdullah. It felt unfamiliar on her lips, but right in her heart. The court hearing took place in a modest chamber in northern Tel Aviv. Ruba stood with calm strength, holding Noam in her arms. Across from her sat two of Sarah's cousins, distant, disconnected, uncertain. Judge Miriam Green, an elderly woman with sharp eyes and a soft voice, looked over the case. She fooled, but beneath this return to normalcy, something new had begun to take root. The name Abdullah, once whispered in speculation, had grown into a symbol of survival, of unity, of divine intention that reached beyond walls and doctrines. Yet for those who had truly known the child, it was never about a symbol. It was always about truth. On a rainy morning, nearly a month after the missile strike, Ruba dressed Abdullah in a tiny gray sweater with his name embroidered in Arabic just above his heart. His eyes gleamed with curiosity as she fastened each button. "We have somewhere important to go today," she whispered. He responded with a cheerful giggle, his hand waving toward the Qur'an beside his crib. It was worn now, its corners kissed, no longer just a book, but a piece of him. Ruba picked it up gently, tucking it into her shoulder bag above a small velvet pouch containing Sarah and Yo's burned wedding ring. Today they were visiting his parents. The small cemetery on the outskirts of Jaffa was quiet, the olive trees rustling gently in the breeze, as though whispering in a language only God could understand. Imam Musa waited silently, his hands folded behind his back. Two simple white marble headstones stood side by side. On Sarah's stone, someone had left a folded piece of paper. Ruba picked it up. She, who heard the Qur'an and carried it with love, it read, no name, just silence. Standing with Abdullah in her arms, she faced the graves. "I don't know how much you knew," she said softly. "I don't know how far your hearts had turned. But I do know this child was entrusted to me, and I will never let him forget your love or your courage." She placed the Qur'an gently between the stones and whispered, "To Allah we belong, and to Him we return." Surah Al-Baqarah 2:156. On the way back, Ruba took a longer path, through neighborhoods once divided by tension, now stitched together by fragile peace. She passed a mosque, then a church, then a small unmarked building that had once been vandalized for its neutrality. Today, children of every background played outside its doors. An old Jewish man with a kippah leaned out a window. "Is that the boy?" he asked. Ruba nodded. "Yes." His eyes shimmered. "Tell him," he said. "The world tried to tear us apart, but somehow he brought the pieces together." That night, Ruba was invited to an event she never imagined attending, a joint interfaith vigil in honor of children of war and of mercy. Muslims, Christians, Jews, and people without labels stood side by side. They didn't come to argue. They came to light candles, to pray, not separately, but together. As dusk wrapped the courtyard in soft light, a Christian priest read from Psalms. A rabbi followed with verses from the Torah. Then, with reverence, Imam Musa stepped forward and read from Surah Al-Balad. "We have certainly created man into hardship, but he has not passed the steep path. And what is the steep path? It is the freeing of a slave, feeding on a day of hunger, caring for an orphan near of kin, a needy person in misery." He closed the book and looked out. "And perhaps," he added, "it is also carrying a child not born of your womb, but born of your love." All eyes turned toward Ruba and the boy in her arms. After the vigil, a woman approached her. In her 30s, she carried the weight of sorrow in her hands and eyes. "I'm Jewish," she said softly. "I lost my faith after my son died in the Gaza border conflict." Ruba bowed her head. "I'm deeply sorry." "I didn't come to be changed or converted," the woman continued. "I came to say, thank you." "For what?" "For proving that belief doesn't belong to any side. That love can look like you." Ruba's eyes filled with tears. "Then your faith isn't lost," she whispered. "It's just waiting for you to knock." And so the world moved on. But the story of Abdullah transformed into something quieter, yet no less profound. A children's book was published, The Baby Who Survived the Fire. Not religious, not political, just a gentle tale of light and darkness. It was translated into 22 languages. A mosque in Sweden dedicated a Friday sermon to his story. A synagogue in Brooklyn referenced it during Rosh Hashanah. A Nigerian pastor quoted Sarah's final letter during a sermon on mercy. At Tel Aviv University, a new elective was added. Faith in Crisis, the Role of Miracles in Modern Conflict. The first guest speaker, Lidl Abraham. She opened not with narration, but a confession. For most of my life, I mocked belief, she said, until I stood in a room where fire had devoured everything, except a baby and a book. She paused. That's when I understood. Maybe God doesn't shout. Maybe he whispers, through the things that shouldn't survive, but do. In the final week before the court would finalize Abdullah's adoption, Ruba took him to the sea, the same beach where Sarah had once walked him in a stroller, unaware of the storm to come. Ruba laid out a blanket and held him close.